We are on the ReThink Podcast.
It says you welcome people. I don't think you did.
Well, we turned over. This is episode 101.
101.
So we don't do that anymore.
Oh, is that a shutdown? No more welcomes.
You're either here or not.
We just get in and go.
Man, what a wild story we're in with David.
Probably David and Goliath, probably the most known. This is probably number 2.
I like the way I think it was DeFazio. He referenced it as David's sin, rather than David and Bathsheba.
Well, that's because he doesn't want us to blame Bathsheba for bathing nude on wherever she was.
Right.
Which I think there's a little bit of guilt there, but we can talk about that or not.
Yeah, I think you're right though. This is
Okay, let's not.
when we think of
Oh, we will. Let's just progress through
when
the
we
story.
think of David. This is for sure the story I think of.
So do we know her? I didn't come across this anywhere, but do we know her as Bathsheba? Was that her name before this scene, or
No,
is
her
that
name
another
was
one?
Sheba.
That's what I wanted to know. But, did she get this name?
Man.
Because...
She got in the bath, and that's how she got her name.
Bathsheba.
Yeah.
You ought to make that joke.
I probably am.
I don't know.
Thank you for that. That was great.
That's pretty lame. I thought.
I thought that was good.
Bryce told a great joke in the green room the other day. He was like, David, last week, he wants to build a house for the Lord. He's in a home of cedar. And he told the band, he said, actually, the fact is David wanted to build a home for the Lord, a house for the Lord. Then he went to Menards and found out the cedar prices are through the roof and just said, I can't do it, Whole band, they laugh at whatever he does, so,
So we are chapter 11, chapter 12 this weekend. David and Sheba. And
That's
it starts
going to be
out
in your brain.
In the spring. Yeah, it already was. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David stays home.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So immediately, problem.
Yeah. So we were talking about this yesterday because you find out later in the story that the Ammonites had already been essentially defeated, and they're in their last stronghold of Ramah, and they're sieging the city. So they would encircle, not let food in and out. They would starve them out. It was pretty common warfare at this point in time. So there is a thought that David he's just basically hanging out waiting for the final blow. Mm-hmm. And we do find that out as well in chapter 12, as well as in First Chronicles? I don't know.
It's Second Chronicles.
Yeah. That he goes and receives the crown.
But there's a little bit of a line. I just picked up on it when I was recording for the radio, and I read it out loud, and it resonated with me. It's in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how they would typify evening. I don't know. The third watch was 3 o'clock. Well, it's 3, 4, 5, whatever. He gets up from his bed.
Mm-hmm.
I read that. I'm thinking, what the crud? Why is he in bed in the early afternoon? Because he's not where he probably needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So is he taking a nap? If he's taking a nap because he stayed up too late the night before looking off his rooftop, is he, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or is he depressed?
Right.
Is he a guy who's all of his life has been on the run, has been conquering the enemy, it's been, kill, and now he's the king.
The thing,
he's arrived. Now where is he going to go?
Mm-hmm.
And so he's it's like he's in this midlife crisis.
They talk about, it's lonely at the top. And that's kind of where David's at.
The thing that is just kind of crazy to me is thinking about where we have progressed in this story, because from a person's view on the outside looking in, we have gone from bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. We went first time bad, second time we did it God's way. And then last week we ended with David at the feet of God. And then we fast forward from chapter 7 to chapter 11, and here we are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But isn't that the story of everyone's life?
Yeah.
We don't live this nice straight line towards God, and we don't live usually a straight line away from God. There's these moments in every single person's life where there is a recognition of we need God in our life, whether we choose that or not. and vice versa, where we're following God, but we choose ourselves
Yeah.
over God.
But I'm saying, like, you go from the mountaintop to bam. I mean, it falls fast.
But I don't think it really does.
I know, but from the outside in, that's what it looks like.
I think always when we look at somebody's fall, if you step back a few steps, you see their steps,
Yeah, true.
right?
Yeah, because
it's a progression.
So, like Uriah and Bathsheba would have been around David for 10 years.
At
while
least.
while he's on the run.
In the caves and stuff.
Like, they were hanging out. They were having dinner.
I mean,
They were around each other.
my mind goes like, how many times had David and Bathsheba made eye contact?
Mm-hmm.
You know, David, does he know that well, he knows where Uriah's house is,
Yeah.
right? And she knows where the palace roof is. I mean, if you can see from the top down, you can see from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, she might not be able to see, all of David, but like he can see of her. But I just wondered how many times has this thought gone through David's mind? Man, Uriah's wife's hot.
I don't think it was the first time in chapter
Did
11.
not see that coming.
Yeah, I
don't
don't
you
think it
so?
was. Yeah,
No,
I
they
do.
knew each other. We get this idea like, oh, she's just living in the city and they have him. We're talking, this is a village.
Yeah.
And he's one of the 30 loyal men for David.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then her dad is the top advisor for David. So, like, there's a deep connection here to this family,
So the question is like, was she...
What do you want to say here, Matt?
Sorry, this
Spit
is
it out,
so
dude.
weird. It's like, was she willing? Like, did she want to grab this attention of his, or did she not?
So I think that
That's a tough question.
if you look in the NIV Study Bible, it actually makes note of that. So I'd encourage you to read the study notes in there. And this is a highly debated, thing. So I think there's a few things here that we probably just need to look at. One, we know that David's up on his rooftop, and we always assume that Bathsheba is on the roof bathing as well. But the text never says that. It just says that David saw her. The cultural practice was that you bathed in the courtyard, and she's doing it as she's following Levitical law of cleansing herself after her time in the month. So she knows the law. David knows the law. And, but at the same time...
So back up the courtyard. Because it's not public. It's the courtyard of her home.
Yes, it would have been private. But the fact that
But-
David sees her...
He's elevated.
Yeah, he's elevated because we have the picture and you can actually go there.
We've been there.
Yeah. And so the question is, was she in the courtyard or not? It doesn't really specify. And here's the important part, I think, for us as we go through the story. The story's not so much about Bathsheba as it is about David,
That's
who's
right.
the one who has been anointed as Israel's leader by God for his purpose. But at the same time, there's precedent going back to Abraham and Sarah when they come in and Abraham's like, hey, she's my sister. You can have her, king. And the king's like, finds out because all these things are happening. What have you done to me? You've brought curses on me. She's married. It's your wife, Abraham. And so there's precedent there where a individual, specifically a woman who is married, could have said no. So, and there's Levitical law that if you commit adultery, which adultery is having relationships with not even a married woman, but it has to be a virgin is what it has to be.
Person outside of marriage.
Yeah. So David commits adultery.
Well, adultery could be
flat out.
Doesn't have to be with a virgin.
Right.
Adultery would be sex with anybody outside of marriage.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sorry. But, I'm sorry. The whole rape thing, because that comes into this story too. David, it doesn't have any suggestion of
gotcha.
David raping her or anything like that.
Right.
But Bathsheba doesn't resist.
The reality is,
But it wouldn't have mattered if she did because he was a king.
He could have invoked that, but we don't see him doing that either.
the reality is he put himself in a situation where he sinned.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is a story about David.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe it's okay to be on the roof, but when he saw, he shouldn't have lingered.
Yeah. He
Right.
should have been like, hey, let's get the guys together and play some cards or something.
The lust is not the sin here. His lust is not the sin.
Yeah.
But what he does with that thought
Mm-hmm.
leads to
Mm-hmm.
his sin.
Yeah, and we see that in the story of Jesus in the wilderness. He's tempted, but he doesn't sin. And so in Hebrews, whenever it talks about we have a high priest who can, empathize with us because he's been tempted in every single way, but has not sinned. Like, that's the whole point. We're going to be tempted in life. Every single one of us are going to be tempted. It's what we do with that temptation that determines how or what we do, sin-wise.
I think there's two huge lessons to learn from it. One is if you put yourself in a position where you're going to be tempted, like he did, you're setting yourself up to fail. Right? And when I read this story, so that's the first thing. Stay out of those places. And the second one is if you find yourself there, run.
Mm-hmm.
That's Joseph, right? Potiphar's house.
Yep.
Come with me, come with me, come with me. He refuses. Text doesn't tell us this, but I think he comes to the conclusion, I got to get out of here. Maybe it's for his own heart, maybe because she's up in the ante, I don't know. But he runs.
Mm-hmm.
David doesn't run. He inquires.
Mm-hmm.
And when he inquires, the deed is done.
Yep.
Right? Because
He already knew.
he knew what he was going to do. He knows where Uriah's at.
Mm-hmm.
He's off to war fighting for David. And he knows he's not coming back.
Well, then I don't know how far you want to go into the story, but then he tries to cover it up, and it gets pretty bad pretty fast.
Yeah.
Sin always leads to more sin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the line, I don't think I created it, but I've used it so many times now I don't even know.
Oh, you created it.
I'm
But the
pretty
li-
sure it's yours. I'm going to quote you,
Mhm.
so.
The line is, what is the line?
Sin always...
Cost more than,
Is it caught?
Sin costs you more than you.
takes you
Wanna
further than you
pay.
want to go and costs
Takes
you
you
more
further
than you
than
want
you
to
wanna
pay.
See, I've
Jeff
used it
Mike-
enough they kind of had it.
It's totally yours.
We've been working on it, memorizing.
Never heard of Rick Warren.
When you're reading through this story, and you just alluded to the next phase of it, which is killing of Uriah.
Yeah.
David doesn't lustfully look at Bathsheba thinking, I'm going to have to kill her husband,
Right.
No.
right? She's going to get pregnant and I'm going to be interested. No. It's
It's
like,
hey, this will be fun. No one will know.
right. No one, or I'm the king, right?
Well, and this
I
is-
deserve this anyway. I mean,
This is where it ends up going. Pretty soon what happens is
poor woman, she's unhappy at home alone.
you do something you shouldn't do, and then pretty soon you try to cover it up, and then there's lie after lie after lie after lie. You don't know who you've lied to, and it's spinning out of control fast.
Well, and the thing about this is he even spiritualizes it.
Yep.
Oh.
Those are the most dangerous sins right there.
So
When you
I
start
like
spiritualizing
jokingly,
it.
flippantly said that, but you even get rationalizations like, and we don't know if David's rationalizing on this, but I've talked to enough people to know sometimes they'll say, well, like, she needed me,
Mhm.
you almost like you say, this isn't for me, this is for them.
Yeah.
So
Sin just causes delusion in our head, and we can convince ourselves of anything.
So there's a few interesting little pieces David it mentions in there about like going home and washing your feet. So David tells him like go home and like be with your wife. That phrase "go home and wash your feet" is this idea of like going to have relationships with your wife biblically. Yeah. And because he's trying to like make it look like it's going to be his kid,
Right.
But then whenever Uriah comes back and he's like, no, I slept outside, David's like, haven't you been off at war? Like, do you not want to go home? And he's essentially saying like, are you not a man? Like, what's wrong with you? Like,
Because
But
David's caught up in that lust
Yeah.
fulfillment, which is never fulfilled, right? When
Yeah.
you chase lust, it just causes more lust.
and so then Uriah is like, no, because so fighting in Israel's army was an act of spiritual worship. And so if you had relationships with a woman, it disqualified you from service. And so if he would have went home, he would have been disqualified from going back into the battle. He also knew that. So Uriah is like, no, this is my service to the Lord by fighting this in this battle. I'm not going to disqualify myself.
Which is interesting. He's Uriah the
Hittite.
Hittite. He's
The
not
Gentile.
even Jewish. He's a Gentile.
Yeah. And
then,
so
I
David
mean-
tries to get him drunk,
Yeah.
and
y-
still, sorry,
Has more dignity drunk than David does.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Like at this moment, Uriah understands who God is better than David does.
We forgot the line. Maybe if anybody has listened to this podcast that doesn't know the story in detail, she got pregnant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's pregnant.
Yeah. And he's like, crap. And he has Uriah.
Goes into cover-up mode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The interaction with Joab, his military leader, tells us
It's also
Good.
his nephew.
Joab sees right through this,
Yeah.
right? Because, the message Uriah himself, David trusts him to take back a sealed message of his own death warrant. The message was, when you're in the thick of the battle, put Uriah in the front, retreat from him, and let him be killed.
Mm-hmm.
Joab's like, okay, that's what the king said. Puts him in the front, they retreat. Uriah dies along with some other soldiers.
Yep.
Your sin's never just a problem for you, is it? There's always collateral damage when you sin.
Yep.
How many kids grow up in a nightmare of a broken home,
So,
right? Because
yeah, and even
and
in
dad,
that
yeah.
is the collateral damage not done. So Uriah dies, the men with him die that he's leading, but then we're going to see that child dies too. And David brings Bathsheba into his home, and it's a picture of David spiritualizing this concept of kinsman redeemer. Is okay. This is crazy, but he's essentially trying to bring honor to Uriah by letting him die in battle. So he's trying to solve that problem, so the people will have a spirit oh, Uriah died in battle. It was his act of worship. That's why he didn't want to be disqualified. So he sends him off. He dies in battle. But then David wants to paint this picture of himself of, look at me. I'm going to bring her into my home and redeem her. And there's going to be a child born that keeps his name. Now, here's the problem. Because a kinsman redeemer, the first child that's born from that child would be the line in which that name would continue. But we know that's not the line that God had planned for the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
because this child conceived out of wedlock won't be that line.
yep. And there's consequences for it.
But they eventually have Solomon.
That's right, the second child.
God's gracious.
It's incredibly gracious. But
Jeff's sermon's got
the
longer.
first child
Oh,
dies.
my sermon's like hours.
The first child dies as a result of David's
sin.
sin. Not anything the kid did, and it's a
Innocent.
year after.
Innocent
He's
suffer
confronted
when
about
we
it.
sin.
Huh?
Innocent people suffer when we sin.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's not fair. This is one of those passages that, for me, you can read this and just gloss over it, but this is one of those moments. It's this is on David, all on David at this point.
Yeah.
Because God already made a covenant with David that his line would sit on the throne forever.
Yep.
And so now there's consequences because David stepped out of the line, but God is still faithful in his covenant to David by giving them Solomon. It's crazy.
So let's tie two pieces together before we get far away from that with the rest of the story. This is important. So the child dies, innocent dies because of the sin of the father here. If you look at this story, chapter 12, verse 7, is where Nathan the prophet comes to confront David. And the end of that story, David becomes angry at this man who's basically taken from the poor because the man's rich. And Nathan says that powerful line, that's you. You're the man.
You're the man.
That's you, right? And the way Michael DeFazio, Right Now Media, great stuff, teaches through David's life. And he's the one that pointed out this is a chiastic structure. Chiastic is, a poetic term. So you have paralleling ideas. We end the story pretty soon in Ramah. We started in Ramah.
Yep.
We have conception and conception. We have, all and it comes together to this moment that this is the tip of the spear for the story.
Yep.
You're the man. right? Because what matters is not that David is perfect. Obviously not. He's an adulterer and a murderer just in this story alone. Yeah, but he's a man after God's own heart. What in the world does that mean? That's the way he responds when he's confronted with his sin, right? And so David's response is, you're right. And what I think is powerful is he doesn't say, I've sinned against Uriah, I sinned against the people, I sinned against Bathsheba, I sinned against the son that died. David says, I sinned against the Lord.
Yep. Because everything, here's the other thing. All of the things he did, he could have done as king. I mean, he could do it. The problem is, he's not just the king. He's the anointed one of God. So he has this special relationship with God. And he breaks all of the things that would honor God and set him apart. And he sins against God in every facet.
So what does verse 13 say after David says, I have sinned? Nathan says, and God's forgiven you.
Yep. You're not going to die.
Wow. So, but still consequence.
Yep.
Sin has consequences. The child dies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a picture, I think. Innocent dying for the guilty.
Yep.
That's a foreshadowing. That's what we're going to see with the ultimate king in the line of David, Jesus, is going to be the innocent who dies for the guilty, which, the way the story's set up, isn't just David, but it's meant to read to all of us, you're that man.
Yep.
That's you. That's us. That's me. Right? Not that I've committed adultery and murder, but we're sinners. And if we don't know how to repent and turn back to God, wow, consequences are intense.
I like the way we're ending this sermon too, is in Psalm 51, because it's a reminder to us of our response, of David's response, but it ought to be our response as well. When we are confronted with sin, it's not to run and hide or, try to cover up or avoid or even blame, but it's creating me a clean heart,
So I'm blown away the more I've thought about Psalm 51, and here's what it says at the beginning, the heading, for the director of music, a Psalm of David. It's one thing to confess your sin to the person who's confronting you, because obviously he knows, and to be forgiven. But you turn it into a song to be sang by the people so that your sin is commemorated. Well, man, there's no hiding in that.
Could you imagine the music director be like, get David coming to him and be like, hey, I got this song I want everyone to know and sing.
Right. Well, it goes on to say,
look at it.
When the prophet Nathan came to him after David had committed adultery with Bathsheba, have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. And on he goes, It's just powerful. This is the king. If you talk about anybody who could cover up and hide, but he doesn't.
Yep.
That's why we're told in Acts he's a man after God's own heart. Pretty powerful. Sin requires repentance.
Yep.
Well, we could go on and on and on and on, and the fear is that on Sunday for sermons we will. So we'll try to be careful.
It's going to be good.
It's going to be good. I'm excited about this one. Thanks for joining us on the ReThink Podcast, episode number 101.